Welcome to Time Before Us, the channel where ancient history breathes again. Before time had a name, before the first human breath, there existed a world fierce, forgotten, and alive. Creatures of scale and silence, predators wrapped in. Feathers, titans that shook the earth. Lives erased, bones buried beneath eternity. But they are not lost. They are waiting. This is Time Before Us, where prehistory worlds rise again, and the stories buried in stone finally speak. Chapter 1. Microraptor, the four-winged phantom. Imagine walking through a dense prehistoric forest. The sun filters through the canopy in broken rays, casting dappled shadows on ferns below. You hear a faint rustle above, but it's not from a squirrel or a bird. Something glides silently between the trees, landing with feathered grace on a low-hanging branch. It's not a bird. It's Microraptor. This tiny dinosaur, barely the size of a modern raven, was one of the strangest creatures to ever take to the trees and possibly the skies. With shimmering feathers and wings not just on its arms, but on its legs as well, Microraptor was a four-winged experiment in flight. And it may have been one of the first animals to ever glide between branches like a feathered phantom. Discovered in the early 2000s in China's famed Liaoning fossil beds, Microraptor didn't just shake up our understanding of dinosaur flight. It shattered it. Most people had grown used to the idea that birds came from dinosaurs. But a dinosaur with wings on its legs? That was unheard of. And yet, the fossil evidence was undeniable. Perfectly preserved impressions showed long, asymmetrical flight feathers on both arms and legs. These weren't random tufts of fluff. These were purpose-built aerodynamic surfaces like miniature airplane wings, suggesting that Microraptor could glide, if not outright fly. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Microraptor wasn't a bird. It was a dromaeosaur, cousin of Velociraptor. And it had claws, sharp teeth, and a long tail with a feathered fan at the end. Not exactly your average songbird. So, what did it use all that flight gear for? Well, most paleontologists believe Microraptor was arboreal, meaning it lived in trees. But unlike modern birds, it didn't fly from a standstill or launch into the sky. Instead, it likely climbed up trunks and glided down between branches or across short distances. Think flying squirrel, but with dinosaur eyes, claws, and an appetite for meat. And yes, it was definitely a predator. Fossils have been found with tiny fish, birds, and even lizards inside their bellies. That means Microraptor was not only agile enough to catch fast prey, it could hunt across multiple environments, trees, land, and water. Let that sink in for a moment. A creature the size of a pigeon, hunting birds and fish. With four wings and a dinosaur's brain. It's no wonder this little hunter has become one of the most iconic feathered dinosaurs ever found. But what might it have looked like in life? Well, scientists actually studied microscopic pigment cells preserved in Microraptor's feathers. And what they discovered was stunning. This tiny predator was probably iridescent black, like a modern raven. Its feathers shimmered with purples and blues depending on the light, perhaps used for display, camouflage, or even mate attraction. It wasn't just small. It was stunning. And that makes Microraptor an important reminder of just how visually complex the dinosaur world may have been. Forget dull, scaly lizards. These were vibrant, bird-like, and behaviorally rich animals, even at tiny sizes. But Microraptor also teaches us something else, something bigger. Its anatomy suggests that flight didn't evolve in a straight line. The path to powered flight, like what we see in modern birds, was messy. Some dinosaurs glided, some flapped. Some had feathers but couldn't fly at all. And some, like Microraptor, were somewhere in between, perhaps a dead-end branch on the evolutionary tree, or maybe a crucial stepping stone. It tells us that evolution experimented. And that's what makes tiny dinosaurs like this so fascinating. They weren't just miniature versions of the famous giants. They were innovators, survivors, creatures with unique adaptations that helped them thrive in ways their enormous cousins couldn't. In fact, their small size may have been their greatest advantage. Large dinosaurs couldn't climb trees. They couldn't dart through branches or glide between clearings. But Microraptor? It turned size into stealth. It made the forest its kingdom, not through brute force, but through agility, silence, and flight. And in a world filled with predators far larger and more dangerous, that might have been the perfect strategy. Even more mind-blowing? Some paleontologists believe Microraptor's kind is directly related to the ancestors of modern birds. In other words, when you watch a raven take off from a fence post, or a crow soar across a parking lot, you're seeing the legacy of tiny, four-winged dinosaurs that lived over 120 million years ago. It's easy to miss the miracle in something small. But Microraptor proves that sometimes the most powerful evolutionary leaps begin with creatures you could hold in your hand: a shimmering black phantom in the trees, a glider, a hunter, a dinosaur. Chapter 2. Archaeopteryx, the bird before birds, expanded to approximately 1,000 words. It's the late 1800s. A limestone quarry worker in Bavaria, Germany, chips away at a slab of stone and stumbles upon a fossil so strange it looks like something out of a myth. It has the skeleton of a reptile, but the feathers of a bird, clawed fingers, but wings, teeth, but also a wishbone, tailbones, but also flight feathers. The creature was named Archaeopteryx, Greek for ancient wing, and for over a century, it sat on the throne as the first bird ever discovered. But here's the twist. Archaeopteryx wasn't quite a bird, and it wasn't quite a dinosaur either. It was something in between, a beautiful, bizarre mosaic of traits that made it the ultimate evolutionary puzzle piece. At just the size of a crow, Archaeopteryx could have perched in your hand, claws curled delicately around your fingers, feathers ruffling in the breeze. And yet, this tiny creature carried enormous weight on its delicate shoulders. For decades, it was the only fossil that clearly connected modern birds to ancient dinosaurs. It had feathered wings, yes, but it also had teeth, like a velociraptor. A long bony tail, unlike any bird alive today. Its 3 separate fingers ended in sharp claws, not fused like a modern bird's wing. And its chest? Lacking the strong keel bone needed for powerful wing strokes. So how did it fly, if it even could? That question has haunted paleontologists for generations. Some believe it glided between trees, using its feathers like parachutes. Others suggest it could launch into the air for short, clumsy bursts of powered flight, like a modern pheasant spooked into the air. And some think it didn't fly at all, but used its feathers for insulation, display, or balance, proof that feathers didn't evolve just for flight. No one knows for sure. But what we do know is this: Archaeopteryx was no evolutionary fluke. It lived about 150 million years ago, during the late Jurassic, when Europe was a cluster of tropical islands. Imagine shallow seas, mangroves, fern forests, and humid air. Archaeopteryx may have darted along the forest floor or leapt from branch to branch, hunting insects, lizards, and even small fish near the lagoons. Fossilized impressions suggest it was agile, alert, and quick on its feet, traits we associate with both modern birds and small theropods. But here's the kicker. Modern discoveries have complicated its story. In the early 2000s, researchers in China began uncovering dozens of exquisitely preserved feathered dinosaurs. And some of them, like Xiaotinja, Anchiornis, and Aronis, were either older than Archaeopteryx or more bird-like in key ways. Suddenly, Archaeopteryx wasn't a one-of-a-kind transitional fossil. It was one piece of a much larger picture. In fact, some studies suggest it may not have been a bird at all. Rather, it may have been a feathered dinosaur closely related to birds, but not quite inside the bird family tree. So, was Archaeopteryx dethroned? Not exactly. Because regardless of where it sits taxonomically, it still bridges the gap between creatures that were grounded and those that soared. It captures that messy, magical moment in evolutionary time when dinosaurs were becoming something else, when wings were forming, when feathers had many uses, when biology was playing with new blueprints. Archaeopteryx is a fossil caught mid-morph. Let single quotes s pause and picture it. A quiet Jurassic morning. The mist curls over a shallow lagoon. In the undergrowth, something stirs a flash of black and white. A small creature dashes forward on two legs, scrambles up a trunk, and leaps. Its wings flare out not with grace, but with urgency. It glides from branch to branch, lands unsteadily, then pauses alert, sharp eyes scanning for insects or lizards. A predator, yes, but no larger than your hand, and that changes everything. Because if the dinosaur-to-bird transition happened at this scale, maybe it was the smallness that allowed it to happen in the first place. Big dinosaurs ruled the land, but when disaster struck, when climate shifted, when competition grew fierce, it was the little ones who adapted, who evolved, who flew. Small size wasn't a limitation. It was a launch pad. And that's why Archaeopteryx still matters, because it was part of something enormous. Even if it wasn't the first bird, it was the first glimpse we ever had of bird evolution. It cracked open a door we didn't even know existed. When Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, his critics mocked him for lacking transitional forms. Then, almost like the Earth itself was listening, Archaeopteryx was unearthed just 2 years later, a fossil with feathers and teeth. A dinosaur with wings. It was the missing link made real. And even now, with new species pushing Archaeopteryx out of the spotlight, its legacy endures. Because no other fossil had such an impact. No other discovery shifted our perception of birds, dinosaurs, and the strange, shared history between them. Archaeopteryx wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a freak. It was proof that evolution didn't just produce monsters, it produced miracles. That dinosaurs didn't all go extinct, some became robins and crows and sparrows. That the air was once ruled by clawed, feathered predators no bigger than your coffee mug. And that sometimes the most earth-shaking revelations fit perfectly in the palm of your hand. Chapter 3. Compsognathus. Jurassic Park got it wrong. If you've seen The Lost World, Jurassic Park, you probably remember the scene. A curious little girl wanders away from her wealthy family's yacht. She sees a flock of tiny green dinosaurs chirping and hopping around on the sand. They look adorable until they attack. The screen cuts away as chaos erupts. The creature? Compsognathus, or Compy for short. In the film, they're portrayed as ravenous, chicken-sized pack hunters, capable of swarming and devouring prey within seconds. Creepy, aggressive, almost insect-like in their numbers and behavior. But here's the thing. The real Compsognathus wasn't quite like that. In fact, it may be the most misunderstood tiny dinosaur of all time. Let's start with what it actually was. Compsognathus lived about 150 million years ago, during the late Jurassic period, the same time as Archaeopteryx. Its name means elegant jaw, and for good reason. Its long, narrow skull was lined with sharp, delicate teeth, perfect for snapping up insects and small vertebrates. It had long legs built for speed, a lightweight body, and a long tail that acted as a counterbalance, making it a fast, nimble predator. How small was it? The original specimen found in Germany was about 3.3 feet long, from snout to tail tip, and weighed roughly 6 pounds, about the size of a chicken or a large crow. Definitely not the human-eating swarm monster portrayed on screen. In fact, Compsognathus was the first reasonably complete small theropod dinosaur ever discovered, and it played a huge role in the early debates about whether birds evolved from dinosaurs. But here's where the confusion really took off. Only 2 good specimens of Compsognathus have ever been found, one in Germany and a larger one in France. For decades, that was all we had. With such limited material, It became a sort of default model for small theropods. Paleontologists, artists, and writers alike used Compsognathus to fill gaps in our understanding of small dinosaurs, often attributing features from other species directly to it. And that's partly why it ended up being misrepresented. Let's dig into some of the biggest myths and the real science behind them. Myth number 1. Compsognathus hunted in coordinated packs. There's no evidence of this. The idea likely came from modern analogies like how wolves or piranhas hunt, but those are mammals and fish. Most small theropods, including Compsognathus, were solitary or loosely social. There are no fossil beds showing mass gatherings of copies. The movie's swarming behavior? Pure fiction. Myth number 2. Compsognathus had scaly reptilian skin. For a long time, that's what scientists believed. But newer discoveries in China of closely related species like Sinosauropteryx showed clear evidence of primitive feathers. While no feathers have been found on the Compsognathus fossils themselves, it's likely that it had some kind of feathery covering, especially since it lived in a similar environment and shared many features with these feathered cousins. So that green, scaly look in Jurassic Park, probably not accurate. It might have looked more like a fluffy roadrunner. Myth number 3. Compsognathus was a mindless killer. On the contrary, it had a fairly large brain relative to its body size and excellent eyesight. It probably relied on quick reflexes, sharp vision, and agility to catch prey like lizards or insects. It wasn't dangerous to humans, but to a baby mammal scurrying through Jurassic ferns? Absolutely. So why does this matter? Because Compsognathus was one of the first dinosaurs that made people realize how bird-like many theropods were. Long legs, hollow bones, fast metabolism, possibly even feathers. It wasn't a lumbering brute. It was quick, agile, and likely warm-blooded. And its delicate build hinted at a broader truth. Dinosaurs weren't just beasts, they were dynamic. Animals with unique behaviors and physiology. Let's imagine it for a moment. A Jurassic forest, thick with cycads and ferns. The underbrush rustles. A lizard freezes. Suddenly, a flash of motion, a lean, two-legged figure bursts from the shadows. It snaps up the lizard in a quick bite, tilts its head, and darts away on long legs. Not with the thunder of a giant predator, but the light-footed silence of a thief. That's Compsognathus. Tiny. Fast. Precise. And yet, despite its importance, it often gets overshadowed by its movie counterpart, by bigger predators, by flashier fossils. But if you want to understand how dinosaurs became birds, you have to understand copy. It's the archetype for what bird-like dinosaurs looked like before feathers fully took over the stage. And here's something wild. Remember how Archaeopteryx had feathers but looked a bit like a raptor? And how Compsognathus had a similar skeleton but no known feathers? Well, when the first Archaeopteryx fossil was found, some scientists actually mistook it for Compsognathus. That's how close they were in form. The line between bird and non-bird was already that blurry, even back then. That tells us something powerful. That evolution doesn't always happen in a neat, linear way. Sometimes animals share traits for millions of years. Sometimes feathers show up before flight. Sometimes small predators become prototypes for birds. Compsognathus may not be the flashiest dinosaur. It didn't have horns. It didn't have massive claws. But in its own way, it reshaped paleontology. It forced scientists to rethink what dinosaurs were and what they could become. So the next time you watch a Jurassic Park movie and see those swarming green lizards, remember, they got the name right. But the real Compsognathus? It was faster, smarter, and stranger than fiction. And you could have held it in your hands. Chapter 4. Sinosauropteryx, the dinosaur with a raccoon tail. It wasn't the size that made it famous, or the teeth, or even the claws. It was the feathers and the tail. when paleontologists unearthed Sinosauropteryx in 1996 from the dusty rocks of northeastern China, they had no idea what they were about to spark. This little dinosaur, no longer than a house cat, would ignite one of the biggest debates in the history of paleontology. Not because it was dangerous, not because it was rare, but because it was fluffy. Yes, you heard that right. This was the first non-avian dinosaur ever found with direct evidence of feathers. And that changed everything. Before this moment, the idea that many dinosaurs had feathers was considered fringe, speculative, maybe even absurd. Dinosaurs were supposed to be cold-blooded reptiles, scaly, dry, lizard-like. That's how they'd been shown in textbooks, movies, and museum halls for generations. But there it was, a fossil with a delicate halo of wispy filaments tracing its back, arms, neck, and tail. These weren't scales. They weren't impressions of decayed skin. They were proto-feathers, simple hair-like structures that predate modern bird feathers. And the creature they belonged to? Tiny, fast, and sharp-eyed. Its name, Sinosauropteryx prima, meaning first Chinese dragon feather. Let's be clear, this wasn't some late-stage bird-dino hybrid. Sinosauropteryx was a proper theropod dinosaur, a distant cousin of T-Rex and Velociraptor. It had sharp teeth, three-fingered hands, and long legs built for running. It hunted small mammals and reptiles in a Cretaceous landscape teeming with volcanic ash, shallow lakes, and lush forests. And yet, it was covered in feathers. Why? Not for flight, this dinosaur couldn't fly. Its feathers weren't aerodynamic, and its arms were too short to even pretend. So what were they for? The leading theory? Insulation. Just like mammals evolved fur to keep warm, some small dinosaurs evolved filament-like feathers to conserve body heat. And in a world where the nights were cold and predators were everywhere, staying warm meant staying alive. But here's where it gets even wilder. Years after its discovery, researchers went back and looked at those filaments under an electron microscope. What they found changed the game again. Inside the fossilized feathers were melanosomes, microscopic structures that store pigment. Different shapes of melanosomes correspond to different colors in living animals. Long and skinny ones, black round ones, reddish-brown. Using this data, scientists were able to do something no one had ever done before: reconstruct the actual colors of the dinosaur. And what did they find? Sinosauropteryx had a reddish-brown body and a long striped tail, almost like a modern-day raccoon. Just take that in for a moment. A dinosaur with a banded tail, colored in shades of rusty orange and white. Not imagined, not guessed. Confirmed through microscopic pigment analysis. That's not just cool, it's history-making. Because suddenly, the prehistoric world wasn't just black, brown, or gray anymore. It had color, pattern, flash, camouflage, display. It made the age of dinosaurs feel more alive, more real than ever before. And Sinosauropteryx was the door that opened it all. Let's imagine this little animal for a second. Early morning light filters through the conifers. A rustle in the undergrowth. Out darts a creature no longer than a cat, with wide-set eyes, a sleek body, and a tail that flicks behind it in perfect banded symmetry. Its feathers shimmer in the golden light, reddish-brown like fallen leaves. It freezes, listens, then pounces, snapping up a lizard in its jaws before disappearing into the ferns. That's not some scaly monster from a textbook. That's a warm-blooded, feathered predator, lightweight, fast, and adapted to its world. And yet, when Sinosauropteryx was first published, not everyone believed it. Some scientists were skeptical. They argued the feathers were just decayed collagen fibers or frayed skin. But further discoveries, including more specimens and other feathered dinosaurs with even clearer structures, silenced most of the critics. Over time, Sinosauropteryx went from controversial to iconic. It proved that feathers evolved long before flight. that they probably served a variety of functions like insulation, display, and even sensory feedback. It helped redefine what a dinosaur looked like, and most importantly, it changed how we see evolution. Feathers didn't just appear suddenly on the first bird and take off into the sky. They evolved slowly, in stages, first as fuzz, then as bristles, then as complex feathers capable of catching air. It was a messy, beautiful transition, and Dinosaurs stands right near the beginning of that story. Think about what that means. The ground was once ruled by tiny raccoon-tailed dinosaurs, darting between plants and catching prey with surgical precision. The forest floor wasn't silent. It chirped, hissed, rustled, and glowed with color. And in the midst of it all, little Dinosaurs ran on 2 legs feathered, warm and entirely unexpected. It wasn't just a quirky fossil. It was a revolution. It proved that dinosaurs weren't extinct-looking lizards. They were something closer to what we see perched outside our windows every day. Dinosaurs may not have flown, but it helped our imaginations take flight. Chapter 5, Microraptor, the 4-winged glider. If you could travel back 120 million years to the forests of what is now northeastern China, you'd need to look up, not just to avoid falling debris from the canopy, but because something strange might be gliding right over your head. Not a bird, not a bat, not a pterosaur, but a dinosaur with wings not just on its arms, but on its legs. Meet Microraptor, a creature so weird, so unexpected, that it rewrote the rule book on flight in prehistoric times. First discovered in the early 2000s. In the fossil-rich Liaoning province, Microraptor was no larger than a raven. It had sharp recurved teeth for snagging prey, long, clawed fingers for climbing trees, and a narrow feathered tail that looked almost like a rudder. But the real shock? It had fully developed flight feathers on all 4 limbs. That's right. 2 wings wasn't enough for this little flyer. Microraptor had 4. When paleontologists first laid eyes on its fossil, they were stunned. It looked like something imagined for a fantasy film, like a cross between a dragon and a flying squirrel. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. The implications were enormous. It proved that some dinosaurs didn't just climb or walk, they glided. And maybe, just maybe, they were experimenting with the earliest stages of powered flight. Let's talk about those wings for a second. Each arm had long, asymmetrical feathers just like modern birds. These are feathers designed for aerodynamics, not decoration. But that wasn't all. Its legs, yes, its legs also have long flight feathers, forming what paleontologists call a hindwing. It's like evolution tried building an airplane with 2 sets of wings, 1 pair on top, 1 on the bottom. So how did it work? That's been a hot topic for years. Some researchers believe Microraptor used its 4 wings to glide from tree to tree, spreading all limbs wide like a biplane. Others suggest it could launch itself into the air from high branches, flapping its forelimbs and using its hindwings for steering and lift. Either way, this wasn't just falling with style. Microraptor was a master of the air, just in a very different way from the birds we know today. And it wasn't just built to fly, it was built to hunt. Fossils have preserved its last meals, and the variety is astonishing. One specimen had fish bones in its stomach, another had the remains of a small bird, and yet another had lizard bones. This means it wasn't picky. It could hunt in trees, in water, or on the ground. It was a true opportunist. Imagine it for a moment. A dense, misty forest. Ferns cover the ground. A shallow stream winds through the trees. Perched silently on a branch above, something waits. Black feathers shimmer with a glossy, iridescent sheen. A flick of the tail. A twitch of a claw. Then suddenly it leaps. Wings. Spread wide arms, legs and tail catching the air like a parachute. It glides silently, its body sleek and controlled, steering with subtle shifts. It lands with precision. A splash. A flailing fish. And it's gone again, climbing the next tree, vanishing into the canopy. That's not just a dinosaur. That's a four-winged predator of the sky. And here's a fun twist. Microraptor's feathers weren't just for function, they were for show. 2. Detailed studies of its fossilized melanosom's tiny pigment cells preserved in the feather impressions revealed something stunning. Its feathers were likely a deep, glossy black with an iridescent, shiny blue sheen, much like modern crows or grackles. In other words, Microraptor was beautiful. This wasn't some dull-colored lizard with wings. It was a glossy, shimmering creature, glowing under the prehistoric sun. And that suggests something else: display behavior. Perhaps its feathers played a role in attracting mates, intimidating rivals, or even blending into the dark forest shadows. So, what does this all mean? It means that flight didn't evolve in a straight line. We often think of dinosaurs as slowly growing feathers, shrinking their arms, and turning into birds. But Microraptor proves that evolution experimented. It tried weird things: 4 wings, feathered tails, clawed hands, hybrid body plans that defy simple categories. And even more fascinating, Microraptor wasn't alone. It was part of a group called Dromaeosaurids, which includes more famous relatives like Velociraptor. Many of these dinosaurs had feathers, long arms, and bird-like traits, but they were grounded. Microraptor, on the other hand, took to the trees and skies. So, was it the ancestor of birds? Probably not. It seems to be a side branch of the evolutionary tree, one of several lineages that evolved feathers and flight-like behaviors, but didn't make it to the modern bird line. Still, it shows that flight wasn't a singular innovation. It was something multiple groups explored, each in their own way. And that's what makes Microraptor so important. It challenges the idea that evolution is tidy, that there's one path to flight, one blueprint for birds. It shows us that nature is messy, experimental, daring, because what's more daring than a dinosaur leaping from the trees on 4 feathered limbs? Chapter 6, Yuki, the dinosaur with bat wings. Just when scientists thought they were beginning to understand how dinosaurs took to the sky's feathers, flapping, glide paths, evolution carefully sculpting wings over millions of years, Ki came crashing into the story like a meteor, and it changed everything. Discovered in 2015 in Hebei Province, China, Yuki, pronounced Yi-Chi, didn't just ruffle feathers, it redefined what a flying dinosaur could even look like. Its name, meaning strange wing in Mandarin, couldn't be more appropriate. This creature didn't just glide on feathers like Microraptor. It didn't just flap feathered arms like early birds. Yuki had something else entirely: membranous. Wings like a bat. Yes, a bat-winged dinosaur. Let that sink in for a moment, because up until that point, every known flying or gliding dinosaur used feathers. Even pterosaurs, the flying reptiles that weren't dinosaurs, had membrane wings, but they were on a different evolutionary path altogether. But here was Yuki, a small tree-dwelling dinosaur from the Jurassic period, with an anatomy so bizarre that paleontologists weren't even sure it could exist, until it did. So, what did it actually look like? Imagine a crow-sized animal, weighing about half a pound. It had a typical theropod skeleton: sharp claws, long tail, hollow bones. But the arms? That's where the magic, or madness, began. From each wrist extended a bizarre rod-like bone longer than its actual forearm. It was smooth, jointless, and unlike anything seen in other dinosaurs. Scientists believe this bone, combined with a flap of soft tissue preserved in the fossil, formed a skin membrane stretching from the wrist to the side of the body. This wasn't artistic guesswork. The actual fossil preserved impressions of the wing membrane itself, a thin, leathery sheet of tissue, not feathers, connecting that strange rod to the torso. It's the same principle seen in bats, sugar gliders, and flying squirrels. Let's be clear, this was a dinosaur with bat-like wings. So what was going on? It appears that Yiki was part of an experimental group of dinosaurs called the Compsognathus, a weird, sparsely known lineage of tiny tree dwellers. These weren't the sleek, deadly raptors or the burly tyrannosaurs. They were small, climbing, and clearly adapted for life in the trees. And apparently, at least one of them tried a totally different approach to flight. The big question is, could it actually fly? Well, maybe. Most scientists believe Yiki was a glider, not a flapper. Its shoulder bones weren't strong enough to sustain powered flight like birds. But that skin membrane could have caught air, letting it soar silently from branch to branch, much like a flying squirrel. Its long fingers and lightweight frame suggest it was agile, precise, and probably very hard to spot. Now picture it. A twilight. Jurassic forest. The air is thick with humidity and the scent of wet leaves. A rustle, a whisper of movement in the canopy. Then, almost silently, something launches from a high branch. Not a bird, not a bat, but something in between. Its skin catches the fading light. It glides effortlessly between trees, claws extended for landing. A quick skitter up a trunk. Then it disappears, vanished into shadow. That's Yiki. And here's the kicker. Yiki may not have been alone. In 2019 and 2020, paleontologists discovered 2 more species related to it, Embopteryx and Genuine Long. These relatives also had strange wing membranes, reinforcing the idea that Yiki wasn't just a one-off freak, it was part of a broader, evolutionary experiment. This is where things get truly fascinating, because it suggests that during the Jurassic period, evolution was running parallel experiments on flight. One group, like Microraptor and early birds, used feathers. Another group, like Yiki and its kin, used membranous wings. 2 completely different approaches. 2 entirely separate evolutionary pathways. And both of them worked, but only one lineage feathered. Dinosaurs survived and evolved into modern birds. So what happened to Yiki? We don't know for sure. It may have been outcompeted, or the wing design may have been too limiting. Perhaps it couldn't adapt to changing climates or new predators. Maybe the cost of maintaining those long, membranous wings just wasn't worth it in the long run. Whatever the reason, the bat-winged dinosaurs vanished. And that's the bittersweet beauty of Yiki. It represents a path not taken. A moment in deep time when evolution tried something bold, strange, and beautiful, and then let it go. But we're lucky it left behind a fossil, because Yiki teaches us something profound. That evolution is creative. That nature doesn't follow one script. That even in the shadows of the Jurassic, there were creatures experimenting with flight in ways we'd never imagined. We often think of dinosaurs as giant, scaly monsters stomping through swamps. But Yiki reminds us that dinosaurs were also delicate, strange, and subtle. Some flapped, some glided. Some soared. Some failed. But in that failure they left behind wonder. A dinosaur with bat wings, not in a movie, not in a dream, but in the rock-solid record of Earth's history. And now we know. When it comes to the sky, dinosaurs didn't just rule. They imagined it, every possible way to get there. Chapter 7. Anchiornis, the dinosaur that glowed in the moonlight. Not all dinosaurs were giants. Not all were armored or toothy or terrifying. Some were elegant, and Anchiornis may have been one of the most elegant of all. Discovered in the fine-grained sediments of northeastern China in 2009. Anchiornis Huxley looked, at first glance, like just another small feathered dinosaur in a region famous for them. It had a slim build, long legs, a narrow snout, and of course feathers. Plenty of them. But what scientists discovered when they looked closer would make Anchiornis the star of something extraordinary. Because this little dinosaur, about the size of a magpie, is one of the only dinosaurs whose color pattern we can reconstruct in near complete detail. This wasn't guesswork. This was paleontological forensics. The secret lay in its fossilized feathers. Under powerful microscopes, researchers found melanosomes, tiny pigment-carrying structures also found in modern bird feathers. Their shapes and arrangements correspond to different colors, just like in living animals. And what they revealed was breathtaking. Anchiornis had black and white wings, each feather tipped in white, almost like a zebra's pattern, but more delicate. Its body was mostly gray, but on its head, a brilliant burnt orange crest ran from the snout to the back of the skull, like a streak of fire. Think of it, a tiny dinosaur dappled in grayscale, with a flash of rust red across its head, fluttering in the shadows of a moonlit forest. It was beautiful. It was bold. And it might have glowed. Okay, glow might be a strong word. But there's a reason this chapter is called The Dinosaur That Glowed in the Moonlight. The specific pigment structures in Anchiornis feathers are similar to those that, in modern birds, reflect light in low illumination. In other words, under a moonlit sky, Anchiornis may have appeared slightly iridescent, its feathers subtly catching and scattering light like a pearl in the dark. This would have made it visible to mates, rivals, or even predators. So, was that a good idea? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know if the colors were for display, camouflage, or both. But one thing's clear, Anchiornis was not bland. It was a creature of contrast built to be seen. But let's back up for a second. What was Anchiornis exactly? It lived about 160 million years ago, during the late Jurassic, older than Archaeopteryx, making it one of the earliest known feathered dinosaurs. Its name means near bird, and for good reason. It had many of the classic birdie traits. Long, asymmetrical feathers, aerodynamic in design. A wishbone, yes, like the one on your Thanksgiving turkey. Long arms and legs, both feathered. A feathered tail used for steering in the air, but it also had claws on its wings, teeth in its jaws, and a long bony tail. Not quite a bird. Not quite a traditional dinosaur. That puts it right in the gray zone of evolution, a time when dinosaurs were experimenting with flight. So could it fly? Probably not like modern birds. Its wing structure suggests it was more of a glider or flutterer, capable of controlled descents, short flapping jumps, maybe even tree-to-tree movement. It had long feathers on its legs too, similar to Microraptor, suggesting a four-limbed gliding strategy. But even if Anchiornis never truly soared, it was an essential stepping stone in the evolution of flight. It shows us that the earliest flyers weren't necessarily built for speed or height. They were agile, delicate, and probably tree dwellers flitting from branch to branch in dense, prehistoric forests. Now picture that. A quiet grove, bathed in silver light. Shadows ripple across ferns and ancient conifers. Something moves, a soft rustle above. Then, a flash of orange, a pale blur, like a whisper of wind. It lands, looks around. A call, sharp and short. Then it hops forward, feathers catching the moonlight. Anchiornis didn't rule the forest, but it danced through it with grace. And maybe, just maybe, that crest wasn't just decoration. Maybe it was a signal to find a mate, to declare territory, to communicate with others of its kind. After all, modern birds use crests, colors, and feather patterns for exactly those purposes. Why not their ancestors? There's something deeply poetic about all this. We often imagine dinosaurs as brute creatures, hulking, stomping, roaring. But Anchiornis was none of those things. It was light, silent, stylish. It reminds us that dinosaurs weren't just beasts of bone and scale. They were living animals with beauty and complexity, and maybe even social lives. They didn't just exist, they expressed. And here's another twist. Anchiornis has now been used as a model organism for paleotists. Because its color pattern is so well preserved, it's become a standard for how early feathered dinosaurs might have looked down to the last hue and stripe. That makes it more than a fossil. It makes it a window into a lost world, not just how dinosaurs lived, But how they looked, moved, and maybe even felt in a way. Anchiornis is a ghost, not a scary one, but a shimmering trace of ancient beauty. A reminder that evolution doesn't just create survivors. Sometimes it creates style. So the next time you see a magpie gliding across a winter street, or a jay flashing blue in the trees, remember this. 160 million years ago, a tiny dinosaur with a flame-colored crest was doing the same thing, under the same moon, in a world long gone, but never forgotten. Chapter 8, Calendadromus, the feathered plant eater. Up until a few years ago, there was a rule, a quiet assumption in the world of paleontology. Feathers were for the raptors, meat-eaters, theropods, the sharp-toothed killers, closely related to birds, herbivores, the duckbills, the horned ones, the armored tanks. Sure, they had scales, maybe even spikes, but feathers? That was unthinkable. And then came Kulin-Romeus. In 2014, paleontologists digging in the remote Sibeриan hills near the Kulinda River made a find that would turn that old rule on its head. They unearthed fossils of a small two-legged dinosaur about the size of a turkey. Nothing monstrous, nothing flashy. At first glance, Kulindadromus zabicolicus looked like your average garden variety ornithishia until they saw the skin. Preserved. Across the fossil, especially along the arms, legs, and back were the delicate impressions of feather-like filaments. Yes, a plant eater, with feathers. This wasn't a theropod. It wasn't closely related to birds. In fact, Kulindadromus belonged to a totally different branch of the dinosaur family tree, one that eventually led to creatures like Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and Iguanodo. And that changed everything. Because if this little leaf-munching dinosaur had feathers, it meant something extraordinary. Feathers might not have evolved for flight at all. They may have evolved much earlier, for completely different reasons: insulation, display, maybe even sensation, and they may have been present in far more dinosaurs than we ever imagined. Let's rewind for a second. Kulindadromus was a basal ornithischian, a member of the bird-hipped dinosaurs. But despite the name, bird-hipped, dinosaurs are not the ancestors of birds. Yes, it's confusing. Blame 19th century scientists. That lineage belongs to the lizard-hipped theropods. So when a feathered theropod is discovered, that's expected. But when a feathered ornithischian is found, that's like discovering fur on a turtle. And yet, there they were, 3 types of feather-like structures, preserved in exquisite detail. Simple filaments, like the ones seen on Sinosauropteryx, tufted filaments, branching out like little paintbrushes, ribbon-like structures, arranged in rows on the upper limbs and thighs. Some of them looked more mammal-like than bird-like. Others were unlike anything seen before. This was not a fluke. This was evidence of deep, ancient origin. It meant that feathers, or at least feather precursors, might date back to the very base of the dinosaur family tree. Think about that. The original dinosaurs, the small, fast, bipedal animals that emerged over 230 million years ago, may have been fuzzy. That fuzz may have come before flight, before warm-bloodedness, even before the great split between theropods and ornithischians. Feathers didn't evolve for flight. They evolved for survival. And Kulindadromus is the proof. So what was this little dinosaur actually like? It was small, lightly built, and moved on 2 legs. It had short arms, a long tail, and a beak-like snout for clipping vegetation. Its back, legs were strong, built for running. But despite its speed, it likely relied more on camouflage and agility than strength. Its feathers weren't for flying. They were likely for warmth. Siberia, in the Jurassic period, wasn't the frozen wasteland we know today, but it still had cool climates. Being warm-blooded and insulated would have been a huge advantage for a small-bodied herbivore. And those ribbon-like feathers? They may have been display structures, used to attract mates or signal to others in the group. Imagine a quiet clearing. On the edge of a conifer forest, a group of Colindodromus nibble on ferns and horsetails. One raises its head, its ribbon-like filaments catching the morning light like satin streamers. Another kicks at the ground, scattering moss and insects. These aren't slow, dumb beasts. They're alert, active, possibly even social. And they're covered not in lizard scales but in a patchwork of fuzz and filament. It's a whole new way to see dinosaurs. Colindodromus also teaches us that evolution doesn't move in a straight line. Just because most later herbivores lost their feathers or evolved thicker scales or armor doesn't mean their ancestors didn't have them. In fact, some researchers now wonder if many dinosaurs were partially feathered at some point in their lives. Hatchlings might have had fuzzy down for warmth. Adults might have shed feathers for tougher armor or more energy-efficient skin. It might have varied by species, age, or climate. And that blows open the doors for what dinosaurs could have looked like. What if some stegosaurs had fuzzy backs? What if baby ceratopsians had a halo of fluff? What if feathers were more common than rare? We may never know for sure. But Colindodromus forces us to ask those questions. It forces us to reimagine the Mesozoic not as a scaly, cold-blooded world, but as a dynamic, warm, fuzzy, colorful ecosystem teeming with diversity. We're only beginning to understand. It's a reminder that science doesn't just find answers. It shifts perspectives. Feathers used to mean bird. Now they mean something deeper. They mean survival, communication, warmth, evolutionary, creativity. They mean that some of the most unexpected dinosaurs, the quiet little plant eaters, were also part of the feathered revolution. And all it took was a fossil from Siberia to open our eyes. Chapter 9, Psittacosaurus, the bristled parrot face. If you took a parrot, a porcupine, and a dinosaur, shook them all up in a blender of evolution, you might end up with something like Psittacosaurus. This was no towering giant, no fearsome predator. It was small, no bigger than a Labrador retriever. But don't let the size fool you. Psittacosaurus was full of surprises. Its name means parrot lizard, and it's easy to see why. Its head, in fossil form, has a distinctive beak-like snout, perfect for clipping plants. The upper jaw curves downward, just like a modern parrot's beak. It even had cheek-like flanges, which may have helped it hold food and other parrot-like touch. But the beak was just the beginning. First discovered in Mongolia in the 1920s, Psittacosaurus has since been found in dozens of fossil sites across Asia. It was one of the most common dinosaurs of the early Cretaceous, but it didn't stay common because it was boring. Quite the opposite. In 2002, paleontologists found a fossil in China so well preserved, it still had skin and bristle-like structures. Wait. Bristles? Yes. Psittacosaurus had a row of long, stiff filaments running down the top of its tail. These weren't feathers, not exactly, but they weren't scales either. They looked like thick, hollow quills, and they sprouted in a neat, organized line. This kind of body ornamentation was unheard of for a dinosaur like this. And what's even more fascinating is that these bristles may have been display structures. Think of a peacock's tail or a porcupine's warning quills, not weapons, but signals. They could have helped attract mates, show off strength, or make the animal look bigger when threatened. Now imagine that for a second. A small, herbivorous dinosaur, munching on cycads and ginkgo leaves, lifting its tail bristles high in the air. Maybe during mating season, maybe to warn off a rival, or maybe just because it could. This wasn't a passive plodding reptile. It was a creature with style. And that's not the only thing we've learned about it. Thanks to an astonishingly complete juvenile specimen, we've even been able to reconstruct the coloration of Psittacosaurus, one of the few dinosaurs for which we have such detailed pigment data. Melanosome analysis revealed that Psittacosaurus was countershaded darker on the back, lighter on the belly. This kind of coloring is common in modern animals that need to hide from predators. Think of deer, think of sharks. Even penguins. It's nature's camouflage designed to flatten out shadows, making the animal harder to spot in sunlight. This tells us something important. Psittacosaurus likely lived in forested environments, where light filtered through leaves and dappled the ground. It needed to blend in, to stay quiet, to watch its back. And what a back it had. Those bristles weren't just flashy, they were functional. Some scientists have proposed they could have even helped regulate temperature or played a role in species recognition so other Psittacosaurus individuals could tell each other apart. Let's zoom in on the behavior for a second. We now have fossil evidence of a young Psittacosaurus preserved near what may have been a parental adult. There's even a fossil with over 30 juvenile Psittacosaurs huddled together, suggesting they may have lived in family groups. Imagine that. A dinosaur daycare. Small herds of these parrot-faced dinosaurs moving through the underbrush, the adults watching the skies for danger, the young darting between legs, tails raised, bristles catching the wind. And here's something even stranger. Psittacosaurus walked on 2 legs, but only as an adult. As babies, they walked on all 4s, like most early dinosaurs. But as they aged, their front limbs shrank slightly, their back legs grew stronger, and they transitioned to a more bipedal gait. That's a developmental switch you almost never see. It's as if evolution was experimenting, pushing, adjusting, adapting. And that's a recurring theme in this whole series, isn't it? The idea that dinosaurs weren't locked into one body plan. They changed, they adapted, they got weird. And Psittacosaurus is a shining example, because it takes all the things we don't associate with dinosaurs: bristles, beaks, countershading, juvenile herding, and puts them all in one animal. It breaks stereotypes in the best way. So the next time someone imagines dinosaurs as giant, scaly green lizards, introduce them to Psittacosaurus. Tell them about the dinosaur with the parrot face and tail quills. The one that could walk on 2 legs, the one that took care of its young, the one that wore camouflage, and most of all, tell them it was real. Because if Psittacosaurus teaches us anything, it's this. Dinosaurs weren't just ferocious. They were diverse. They were adaptive. And sometimes, they were downright fabulous. Chapter 10: Bapiosaurus, the fluffy giant with Freddy Krueger claws. Expanded to approximately 2,000 words. In the world of dinosaurs, most creatures seem to fit neatly into categories. There are the classic predators, sleek, sharp-toothed, terrifying. There are the gentle giants, long-necked and slow-moving. And there are the armored tanks, spiked, plated, and built like walking fortresses. Then there's Bapiosaurus, and Bapiosaurus refuses to fit in. At just over 7 feet long. It wasn't exactly small, but it certainly wasn't a giant. It wasn't fast. It wasn't toothy. It didn't breathe fire or battle to Rex. It was a lanky, feathered oddball with oversized claws and a mop of primitive fuzz that made it look more like a rejected Muppet than a dinosaur. But what this creature lacked in traditional appeal, it made up for in evolutionary significance. Discovered in 1996 in Liaoning Province, China, Bapiosaurus inexpectus was an unexpected guest in the fossil record. Its very name, inexpectus, reflects how stunned scientists were by its features, because this wasn't just another feathered theropod. It was the first feathered herbivore ever found that changed everything. Let's set the stage. The time is roughly 125 million years ago, the early Cretaceous period. Northern China is warm, wet, and bursting with life. Lakes shimmer between stretches of volcanic terrain. Ferns and primitive flowering plants blanket the forest floor. Trees reach into a humid sky. The air hums with insect life. And on a slope, beneath a low canopy, something strange stirs. It lumbers slowly, arms outstretched. Long claws gleaming in dappled sunlight. Not a predator, not a scavenger, but something far stranger, covered from snout to tail in a coarse, primitive plumage. This animal looks like it fell out of time. Not quite bird, not quite lizard. Its massive claws sway with each step, curved like sickles, long enough to look dangerous. This is Bapiosaurus. And it is doing its own thing. From a distance, its claws are the first thing you notice. Each arm is tipped with 3 fingers, the middle one bearing a claw up to 8 inches long. These aren't the claws of a raptor. They aren't built for slashing or tearing flesh. They're grappling tools. Think of a sloth's claws or an anteater's, exaggerated and adapted to pull down high branches, tear at tough plants, or possibly defend itself if things got rough. The irony, this Freddy Krueger of the Cretaceous was probably a gentle vegetarian. That juxtaposition, lethal looking claws on a peaceful plant eater, is one of the many things that make Bapiosaurus so fascinating. And then there's the feathers. Not sleek, modern feathers like the ones you see on birds today, but broad, ribbon-like filaments, a type of primitive feather known as elongated filamentous integumentary structures. Yes, it's a mouthful. These were long, flat, and frayed. At the edges, nothing like the aerodynamic plumes of modern birds. Instead, they draped across its body in tufts, likely serving multiple purposes. Insulation? Almost certainly. Feathers trap heat, and Bapiosaurus may have been warm-blooded. Display? Very likely. These long, dramatic filaments could have been used to signal health, sex, maturity, or territory. Protection? Possibly more fluff makes you look bigger, more intimidating. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. This dinosaur wore its feathers with confidence. Let's get into the mechanics of this beast. Despite being a theropod, group that includes meat-eaters like T. Rex and Allosaurus, Bapiosaurus took an evolutionary detour. Over time, some theropods gave up their carnivorous ways and turned to plants. This was no small change. It meant evolving a new digestive system, a new jaw shape, new teeth, or in this case, a beak. Bapiosaurus had a toothless keratin-covered beak at the front of its snout, ideal for nipping off vegetation. Behind that, it had leaf-shaped teeth, perfect for slicing fibrous plants. Its neck? Long, shaped, designed for reach, flexibility, and range, almost serpentine. It could lower its head to graze ground cover, or stretch up to grab foliage from higher branches. Its legs were relatively short and sturdy, with 3-toed feet that gave it a stable base. It likely moved slowly, cautiously, perhaps awkwardly compared to sleeker dinosaurs. But that didn't matter. Bapiosaurus wasn't built for the chase. It was built for survival through intelligence, adaptation, and maybe even community. Because there's growing evidence that therizinosaurs, the group Bapiosaurus belonged to, may have lived in small social groups. Imagine a small herd of them browsing together, communicating through chirps or body posture. The larger individuals fluffing their feathers to signal dominance, the juveniles mimicking, learning, growing. This is no Jurassic bloodbath. This is an ecosystem. A quiet, complex, ancient world. But the claws still beg for interpretation. It's hard not to be mesmerized by them. They look so wrong, so dangerous, so out of place. And yet, evolution doesn't keep things that don't serve a purpose. Some paleontologists believe Bapiosaurus claws were multifunctional tools, used not only for pulling down plants, but also for defense against predators like Uranus or Delong, both of which lived in the same region. Others propose a more nuanced use, courtship rituals, just like how birds like the kakapo or the sage grouse use wing displays or dance-like movements to impress potential mates. Bapiosaurus might have used its claws and feathers in elaborate visual displays. Picture a mating season dance, arms raised, feathers spread, claws tapping against tree trunks like ancient drumsticks. In a prehistoric world where survival wasn't just about strength but appeal. The creature that made the biggest impression often got to pass on its genes. And in that light, Bapiosaurus was an innovator. So what legacy does it leave behind? For one, Bapiosaurus helped redefine what feathered dinosaurs could look like. It broke the link between feathers and flight. It shattered the assumption that only carnivorous dinosaurs had plumage. It showed us that evolution reuses its tools in new and creative ways. Feathers for warmth, feathers for mating, feathers for intimidation. And in the case of Bapiosaurus, feathers for flair. Because make no mistake, this was a stylish animal. An ancient anomaly. A creature straddling the line between bird and beast. Imagine standing in the shadow of one. Its shaggy outline sways in the sunlight. A slow, deliberate step. The brush of claws against ferns. A sudden fluffing of feathers like a dog shaking off rain. It sees you, tilts its head, blinks, and then it turns. Back into the forest. Back into mystery. Not with a roar, but with grace. Because sometimes the strangest creatures are the ones that bring us closest to understanding evolution's wildest possibilities. And Bapiosaurus? It wasn't a mistake. It was a masterpiece. Chapter 11, Serenity, the venomous raptor in the shadowy forests of early Cretaceous China. About 125 million years ago, something small, fast, and deadly was on the hunt. It didn't roar. It didn't stomp. It glided through the underbrush like a whisper, silent, feathered, and venomous. Meet Serenity, a creature so deceptively elegant, it could have been the prototype for modern raptors. But behind its avian grace was a secret weapon that no one expected. This wasn't just a feathered dinosaur. It was potentially the first venomous dinosaur ever discovered. Let's take a step back. Serenity means Chinese bird lizard, and it belongs to a group called Dromaeosaurs, relatives of Velociraptor. But unlike the Hollywood villain of Jurassic Park, Serenity was much smaller, around the size of a house cat or maybe a large chicken. Light, agile, and probably as quick as a hawk, its body was covered in true feathers, not proto-feathers, but modern-style ones, including asymmetrical flight feathers on its arms. It couldn't fly, but it could probably glide, or at least perform controlled descents between branches. In other words, it wasn't just running around on the forest floor. It was darting through the trees, and it had tools for the job. Its long tail acted like a stabilizer. Its curved claws could grasp and climb. Its snout was narrow and packed with sharp, blade-like teeth. But one particular feature caught scientists off guard. When paleontologists examined the skull of Serenity, they noticed that a few of its teeth, especially the ones near the front of its upper jaw, had deep grooves running down their length. Not only that, but the upper jawbone had unusual cavities positioned right above those teeth. To the trained eye, that looked familiar. Almost venomous. In snakes, grooved fangs and special skull cavities often serve as part of a venom delivery system. The grooves allow venom to slide from glands into prey as the animal bites down. Could Serenity have had something similar? Could a dinosaur have injected venom into its prey? The idea shook the paleontological world. It wasn't entirely out of the blue. Venom exists today in a range of reptiles, from snakes to Gila monsters. It's not impossible to imagine that dinosaurs, descended from ancient reptiles, might have retained or re-evolved similar traits. But if true, it meant this little raptor had an edge no one had expected. Let's say you're a small mammal or lizard in the early Cretaceous forest. You're minding your own business, scavenging seeds or insects, when Serenity drops from above. It bites, not hard, not fatal, but enough to break the skin. You scramble away, thinking you got lucky, but minutes later, your limbs feel heavy, your breathing slows. You collapse under a bush. Sin or nit ho fe urus follows. Calm, patient. It knew it wouldn't need to chase for long. If this theory holds, then Compsognathus represents a completely different kind of predator, one that used chemical warfare, not just claws and teeth. That's terrifying and amazing, but venom alone doesn't define this dinosaur. Let's talk feathers. Compsognathus is one of the best preserved feathered dinosaurs ever discovered. In fact, its fossil is so complete that individual feather structures were visible in fine detail. Scientists have even been able to make educated guesses about its coloration, thanks to the discovery of melanosums, pigment-carrying structures that survive in fossil feathers. The evidence suggests it had a dark back and lighter underbelly countershading to help it stay hidden from above and below. Think of modern-day hawks and falcons, nature's stealth bombers. It also had long, symmetrical feathers along the tail, forming a fan not for flight, but likely for stabilization or possibly display. A balancing rudder for an agile airborne predator. Imagine it perched on a low branch, feathers puffed slightly, tail twitching like a cat's. It waits, it watches. A flutter of leaves signals movement. Then dash swoop, a silent glide, a quick slash, a venomous nip. Another meal secured, and it didn't stop with prey. That feather display, those sharp eyes, that grace in movement, it likely played a role in mating rituals as well. Some researchers suggest that early feathered dinosaurs used visual cues, much like birds today. Could Compsognathus have performed mating dances? Could it have fanned its tail or flared its feathers in displays of dominance? Could it have used color iridescence, patterning, maybe even flashes of brightness to attract a mate? It's not just possible, it's probable, because Compsognathus was much more than a killer. It was part of a world in transition, a time when dinosaurs were experimenting with feathers, not just for warmth or flight, but for communication, stealth, and social signaling. In a way, it was a prototype bird, caught in the act of evolving. There's something haunting about that. To imagine these creatures not as monsters, but as animals, complex, adaptive, beautiful. To know that just one twist of evolution later, its descendants would be taking to the skies. Compsognathus may not have made it, but its legacy soared, because you can draw a direct line from this venomous, feathered tree hunter straight to the sparrow outside your window. The claws are still there. The feathers are still there. Even the hunting instinct survives. And the venom? Well, we're still not 100% sure. Some scientists have questioned the venom theory, arguing that grooved teeth don't always mean venom, and that the cavities in the skull may have had other purposes. They point to other animals with similar features that don't produce toxins, but the debate remains open. And that mystery keeps Compsognathus in a league of its own, because the idea of a feathered, gliding, venomous raptor isn't just scientifically fascinating, it's cinematic. It stirs the imagination. It forces us to rethink what dinosaurs were capable of. They weren't just big. They weren't just mean. They were weird and wonderful and wildly experimental. And Compsognathus was proof that nature sometimes goes off script in the most brilliant way possible. Chapter 12. Tanyulong, the fluffy dinosaur with quills. For decades, the dinosaur world was split in two. On one side, you had the theropods, the meat-eaters, fast, agile, and often, thanks to fossil evidence, covered in feathers. Think Velociraptor, Microraptor, Compsognathus. On the other side, the ornithischians, the beaked, plant-eating dinosaurs like Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and Iguanodon. They were the scaly ones, armored, horned, or duck-billed, and not at all feathered. It seemed clean, logical, safe. Then, Tanyulong crashed the party and turned everything upside down. Discovered in Liaoning province in 2007, Tanyulong confuciusi was small, barely a meter long, about 3 feet. It walked on 2 legs, had a long tail, and sported the characteristic teeth and jaw structure of an early ornithischian. Nothing about its skeleton looked out of place. Until they looked at its skin impressions, because running down its neck, back, and tail were clear, undeniable traces of quill-like structures, long, stiff filaments, not too different from primitive feathers. Let that sink in. This wasn't a theropod. This was an ornithischian, and it had proto-feathers. At first, scientists were stunned. Many were skeptical. Could the fossil have been misidentified? Could the filaments be some kind of plant matter pressed into the rock? But repeated analysis confirmed it. The filaments were part of the dinosaur. They were embedded in the same sediment layer as the bones. They followed the curves of the body. They were biological. And they changed the game, because up until that moment, filamentous feathers were only known from theropods, carnivorous dinosaurs that gave rise to birds. It made sense in that lineage. It fit the evolutionary narrative. But Tanulong didn't belong to that family tree. It was an ornithischian, possibly related to Heterodinosaurus, a group of small, bipedal herbivores with weird, mammal-like teeth. Nothing about its background predicted feathers. So if Tanulong had them, what did that mean? The most explosive idea was this: maybe feathers or their primitive precursors didn't evolve in theropods alone. Maybe they were present in a common ancestor of all dinosaurs. In other words, maybe all dinosaurs were at least partially fuzzy. That's a bold statement. But let's follow it. If Tianulong, a plant eater, had filaments, and Sinosauropteryx, a meat eater, had feathers, and both were from opposite ends of the dinosaur family tree, then the only logical conclusion is that these structures go way back, farther than we thought. Suddenly, that old image of dinosaurs as massive lizard-skinned beasts starts to crack. What if Stegosaurus had a bristled back? What if baby Triceratops had a fluffy coat? What if feathers weren't special, but standard? Of course, it's not that simple. Evolution doesn't always work in straight lines. It's possible that feathers or quills evolved multiple times in different groups. That's called convergent evolution, when different species develop the same traits independently. But even that's remarkable, because it tells us that nature really liked this idea. Feathers, filaments, quills, not just for flight, not just for display, but for survival. Let's get back to Tianulong. This dinosaur was likely a forest dweller, small and quick, navigating through dense foliage and low vegetation. Its teeth suggest a diet of tough plants, and its body proportions hint at an animal that relied on agility more than strength. The filaments along its back and tail weren't dense like a bird's feathers. They were sparse, stiff, and probably more like porcupine bristles or whisker-like fibers. But they were there, and they were intentional. So what did it use them for? Well, they wouldn't have helped with flight. It couldn't fly. They weren't thick enough for insulation alone. But they might have been used for visual signaling. In modern reptiles and birds, body coverings often serve multiple purposes: warmth, camouflage, attraction. Maybe Tanulong flared its quills in threat displays. Maybe they puffed out during courtship. Maybe juveniles had different patterns than adults. Imagine a jungle trail in the early Jurassic, a rustle in the bushes, a flash of movement. And suddenly, a Tianulong appears, its back arched, bristles raised like hackles, tail lashing behind it. It chirps or hisses. It stands its ground, not big, not strong, but unmistakably confident. And just like that, it's gone. Let's not forget the name. Tanulong Confuciusi. It means dragon from Tanyu, named for Confucius. A poetic name for a poetic little animal quietly revolutionizing how we think about dinosaur skin. The implications go deeper, because if feathers were this widespread, they may have played a role in the entire Mesozoic biosphere, not just in flight, but in thermoregulation, species recognition, even nesting. Modern birds use feathers to line their nests, protect their eggs, and shelter their young. If feather-like filaments were present in early dinosaurs, maybe their social behaviors were more bird-like than we thought. Maybe Tanyulong wasn't just a weird exception. Maybe it was the tip of the iceberg, a reminder that the further back we dig, the fuzzier the lines become literally and figuratively. There's something oddly emotional about Tinyuong. It wasn't powerful. It wasn't enormous. It didn't have teeth like knives or horns like battering rams, but it was pivotal because it reminded us that evolution doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, through a few stiff filaments, through a quiet little herbivore hiding in the leaves, through a fossil that didn't roar, but rewrote the rules anyway. So what's the takeaway? Dinosaurs weren't just feathered because they were on their way to becoming birds. Feathers or proto-feathers may have been part of dinosaur biology from the very beginning. A shared inheritance, a forgotten legacy, a common thread between herbivore and carnivore, predator and prey, and Tanyulong? It's not just an oddball. It's a missing link, one that connects the feathery with the scaly, the flashy with the subtle, the known with the unknown. A tiny, quilled dinosaur with a big message. What we think we know about dinosaurs is just the surface. Chapter 13, Colindodromus, the feathered mystery from Siberia. When most people think of Siberia, they picture endless tundras, harsh winters, and snow-covered forests stretching to the horizon. It doesn't exactly scream hotspot for dinosaur discoveries. But under layers of volcanic ash and sediment in a remote Russian quarry, paleontologists unearthed something that would send shockwaves through the scientific community. A dinosaur. A small, plant-eating one, and it had feathers. This was Colindodromus subicalicus, discovered in 2010 and described in 2014, and it became one of the most pivotal fossil finds in decades. Why? Because it wasn't just feathered. It was very feathered. And it wasn't a theropod. It was an ornithischian, a member of the bird-hipped dinosaur group, just like Tanyulong. But this time, the evidence wasn't limited to a few quill-like filaments. Colindodromus had a feather wardrobe that would make any fashion designer jealous. Let's rewind. At just over 1.5 meters long, about 5 feet, Colindodromus wasn't a dinosaur designed to impress with size. It had a small beaked head, a lean body, long hind legs for sprinting, and short arms that ended in 5-fingered hands. Its long tail helped it balance as it darted through ancient forests that once thrived in what is now Siberia. But it was its skin and outer covering that made it extraordinary. The fossil preserved in exquisite detail showed that Colindodromus was covered in at least 3 different types of feather-like structures, simple hair-like filaments, similar to those seen in Tanyulong. Tufts of short filaments grouped in bundles, scattered across its body, ribbon-like structures, broad and flat, growing in rows along its legs and arms. This wasn't just accidental fuzz. This was intentional ornamentation, a multi-textured coat. That may have served for insulation, signaling, or both, but that's not all. Parts of the body also had scaly patches, small, pebble-like scales on the lower legs and tail. It's a rare case where a dinosaur showed both primitive feathers and scales on the same body, a hybrid of sorts. And that made scientists ask a bigger question. If Colindodromus had feathers, and Tanyulong had quills, and they were both from the ornithischian branch, completely separate from theropods, does that mean all dinosaurs may have had the genetic potential to grow feathers? That possibility is seismic. Because it suggests that the last common ancestor of all dinosaurs, a small, lizard-like creature living over 230 million years ago, may have already been sporting primitive feather-like filaments. In other words, feathers weren't a later invention. They were foundational. Let's dive deeper into what these filaments meant. They likely didn't help Colindodromus fly. It didn't have wings, and the feathers were too short and irregular for lift. Instead, they may have worked as insulation. Siberia, even in the Mesozoic, could be chilly. Maybe not Ice Age cold, but cool enough that staying warm mattered, especially for small-bodied animals. Feathers trap heat far more effectively than scales. So these fluff-covered dinosaurs had a built-in survival system. But there's another function to consider. Display. Just like modern birds use feathers for mating dances, intimidation, or camouflage, Compsognathus may have used its diverse body covering for communication. Picture it in a clearing. A flash of striped ribbon-like filaments along its forearms. A puffed chest of bundled tufts. Sunlight catching its colored fuzz as it performs a hopping, tail-wagging ritual to impress a mate. Suddenly, you're not imagining a scaly beast, you're imagining a bird-like animal, social, complex, and expressive. And that's the point. Compsognathus forces us to let go of the old, outdated image of dinosaurs as dull, dragging reptiles. It reminds us that the Mesozoic was teeming with diversity, not just in species but in texture, behavior, and style. So what do we make of this discovery? At first, it caused controversy. Many paleontologists were cautious. Some argued that the filamentous structures might have evolved independently in different groups, that feathers weren't a shared trait, but a product of convergent evolution. Others saw it differently. They pointed to the structural similarities between filaments in theropods and those in ornithischians. They suggested that the blueprint for feathers may have been deep in the dinosaur genetic code, an ancient switch that could be turned on or off, depending on the species and the environment. Either way, Compsognathus became a key data point. It wasn't just a novelty, it was a challenge to traditional thinking. It reminded scientists that nature doesn't care about our neat categories. That evolution is messy, experimental, and often surprising. That traits we associate with one group may have roots far deeper than we imagined. There's a deeper beauty in this little Siberian dinosaur. Because in a world where T-Rex gets the spotlight and raptors get the fame, Compsognathus quietly rewrote history. It didn't need teeth like knives or horns like daggers. It didn't need to be huge or fearsome. All it needed was to show us that even the smallest dinosaurs were full of surprises. So next time you picture a dinosaur, don't stop at leathery skin and scales. Imagine fuzz. Imagine tufts. Imagine ribbon-like filaments that danced in the wind. Because beneath the shadow of giants, there walked a fluffy little creature that told us something radical. Feathers weren't the future. They were the beginning. Chapter 14. Psittacosaurus, the parrot-faced dino with a bristled tail. If you walked past a Psittacosaurus fossil in a museum without a second glance, you could be forgiven. At first, it doesn't look like much. It's small, it's beaked. It lacks horns, frills, or ferocious claws. It doesn't tower or inspire awe like a T-Rex. But Psittacosaurus is a master of deception. Because underneath its modest appearance lies a dinosaur so bizarre, so loaded with surprises, that it might just be one of the best understood dinosaurs in the fossil record. And it all starts with that face. Its name means parrot lizard. And once you see its skull, you understand why. The front of its mouth ends in a sharp, curved beak, almost exactly like that of a parrot. This wasn't some cute coincidence. It was a serious tool, evolved for slicing through tough vegetation. Psittacosaurus lived around 100 to 125 million years ago during the early Cretaceous, mainly in what is now China, Mongolia, and Siberia. It was a ceratopsian, a member of the same group that includes the mighty Triceratops, but it lived tens of millions of years earlier, before horns and frills had evolved. Think of it as the prototype ceratopsian, the base model, the ancestor. That started it all. And boy, did it thrive. We found hundreds of specimens, adults, juveniles, even hatchlings. In fact, so many Psittacosaurus fossils have been discovered that paleontologists have an incredibly detailed understanding of its growth, diet, behavior, and even skin. Yes, skin. Because some Psittacosaurus fossils preserved soft tissues. And those tissues told a story no one expected. Let's talk tail. One beautifully preserved fossil revealed something truly strange. A series of long, stiff bristle-like structures sprouting from the top of the tail, forming a sort of primitive crest or quill fan. Let's pause on that dot. This is a plant-eating dinosaur with a bristled tail, not feathers. Exactly, but stiff filaments, arranged in a line like the plume of a porcupine or a row of pine needles. And these weren't random. They were symmetrical, deliberate, and possibly colorful. But what were they for? Theories abound. One popular idea is that they were used for display, much like how modern birds and mammals show off their tails during courtship or aggression. Another theory suggests they could have been for species recognition, a way to tell one kind of Psittacosaurus from another in the forested environments they lived in. There's even a chance they helped regulate body temperature, though their location on the tail makes that less likely. Whatever their exact purpose, they challenged the old assumptions that only theropods had feather-like structures. Like Culindadromus, Psittacosaurus showed that ornithischians, the herbivorous, beaked branch of the dino tree, were also in on the fuzz trend. And they didn't stop at quills. Let's look closer at the fossil record, one exquisitely preserved specimen found in China showed not just skin impressions, but melanin pigments, the stuff that gives feathers and skin their color. Using advanced scanning technology, scientists were able to reconstruct the animal's color pattern. The result? A back that was dark brown, a belly that was much lighter, and a gradient in between, a pattern known as countershading. This is exactly the type of camouflage we see in animals like deer, birds, and antelope today. It breaks up the body outline in sunlight, making them harder to see in a forested environment. In other words, Psittacosaurus didn't just have pigment. It had camouflage. It was stealthy. This may be the most complete example of dinosaur coloration science has ever uncovered. But the surprises don't end there. Let's talk about how Psittacosaurus moved. Most early ceratopsians were small and bipedal, meaning they walked on two legs. Psittacosaurus was one of the last of these before the group evolved into the quadrupedal tank-like forms we know from Triceratops and Centrosaurus. But here's the twist. As it grew from a juvenile into an adult, Psittacosaurus actually changed its posture. Baby Psittacosaurus walked on all fours. Adults stood and ran on two legs. This ontogenetic shift, changing posture with age, is rare in the animal kingdom. And it tells us that dinosaurs didn't just evolve in different forms over millions of years. They also transformed over a single lifetime. Younger Psittacosaurus may have needed the extra stability of four limbs while they were small and vulnerable. But as they grew, their center of gravity shifted, their limbs grew longer, and they began to stand upright, becoming faster and more agile. It's another glimpse into just how complex and dynamic these animals were. One of the most poignant fossils ever found is that of a young Psittacosaurus nestled beside an adult. Many believe it to be a parent and its offspring, frozen in time by a volcanic eruption or sudden landslide. This fossil doesn't just show anatomy, it shows behavior. It suggests parental care, social bonding, a world where dinosaurs didn't just eat, grow, and die, but raised their young, sheltered them, protected them. That's not something you'd expect from a minor dinosaur. But Psittacosaurus continues to prove it was anything but. Let's return for a moment to its environment. Psittacosaurus lived in dense, subtropical forests. Volcanoes loomed in the distance. Lakes and rivers snaked between fern-covered valleys. And amid the undergrowth, small dinosaurs moved in herds or family groups, browsing low plants, nibbling ferns, and avoiding larger predators like Cineraptor and Uteranus. Psittacosaurus was prey, but it was prey with a plan, with camouflage, with bristles for intimidation, with speed and smarts, with a strong beak that could tear through the toughest plants and maybe deliver a nasty nip to a predator. That got too close. It wasn't a tank, it wasn't a killer, but it was perfectly evolved for its niche. The legacy of Psittacosaurus isn't flashy. It didn't revolutionize paleontology in one moment. Instead, it chipped away at old ideas quietly, persistently. With every new fossil dot, it taught us that small dinosaurs mattered, that the ones we used to overlook were often the most revealing, that feathers and filaments weren't rare, that camouflage and parenting existed. Millions of years before birds. It taught us that even the ordinary can be extraordinary if we're willing to look closer. So the next time you think of dinosaurs as scaly roaring monsters, picture a small parrot-faced creature, its tail bristling like a brush, slipping silently through prehistoric ferns. It may not roar, but it rewrites history, one bristle at a time. Chapter 15, Yi-Ki, the dinosaur with bat wings. Imagine scientists unearthing a fossil, brushing away millennia of stone and ash, expecting feathers and claws, and instead uncovering a wing unlike any ever seen on a dinosaur. Not a bird wing, not a pterosaur wing, but something completely unique. That was Yi-Ki, a name that means strange wing in Mandarin. And strange doesn't even begin to cover it. Discovered in 2007 and officially described in 2015, Yi-Ki came from the famous Toho-Jishan Formation in Hebei Province, China, a region that has given us some of the most remarkable feathered dinosaurs ever found. But Yi-Ki wasn't like Microraptor, Archaeopteryx, or Serenity. This little creature, no bigger than a pigeon, belonged to a tiny, mysterious branch of the theropod family tree known as Compsognathus. Even within this weird lineage, Yi-Ki stood out like a black sheep wearing a jetpack because it had bat-like wings. Let's break that down. Yi-Ki had feathers, yes. Wispy, filamentous ones, mostly used for insulation or display. But when scientists examined its arms, they found something never before seen in a dinosaur, a long rod-like bone extending from the wrist. This strange spur was too long, too robust, and too precisely placed to be random. It was connected to the body by a preserved stretch of skin, a membrane. You heard that right, a wing membrane, something like what you'd find on a bat, or a flying squirrel, or a pterosaur. This meant that Yi-Ki was likely the first known dinosaur with membranous wings. Not feathered wings, not gliding flaps, but stretchy, skin-like surfaces supported by a combination of bones and possibly cartilage. The result? A dinosaur that looked like it came from another planet. Imagine a small, fluffy creature perched on a branch, large, forward-facing eyes, tiny claws gripping bark, long fingers fanning out membrane between them. Its skin shines like leather. Its body hums with tension. Then suddenly, it leaps. Not flying like a hawk, not gliding like a modern bird, but soaring like a bat. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Was Yi-Ki actually capable of powered flight? Or was it just a glider? Most paleontologists agree it wasn't strong enough to flap those wings like a bird or bat. Its shoulder and chest bones lacked the robust musculature needed for that kind of motion. But as a glider, Yi-Ki could have excelled. Gliding between trees, using wind currents to its advantage, it could move efficiently through the dense, prehistoric forests of Jurassic China, avoiding predators, sneaking up on prey, or finding food among high branches. But then comes the stranger question: why? Why would a dinosaur evolve this kind of wing? Feathers, sure. We've seen that movie, but membranes? That's pterosaur territory. This led some scientists to wonder if Yi-Ki represented a case of evolutionary experimentation, a dinosaur trying out a completely different solution to the problem of flight. Because let's not forget, the Jurassic was a time of aerial arms races. Pterosaurs ruled the skies. Birds were just beginning to flap their wings. And in the middle of it all were creatures like Yi-Ki, doing something entirely different. It was nature's prototype phase, a period of biological trial and error, When evolution threw every idea at the wall to see what would stick. Some animals tried feathers. Others tried membranes. A few, like Yi-Ki, tried both. That's what makes it so fascinating. Let's talk anatomy for a moment. Yi-Ki's wing structure involved 3 main parts. An elongated third finger, similar to that in pterosaurs. A unique rod-like bone called the styloform element, projecting from the wrist. A skin membrane, stretched between the arm, wrist, and body. This trio created a wing surface unlike anything else in Dinosauria. And because Yi-Ki was so small, weighing maybe 400 grams, it didn't need much lift to glide effectively. Its name, fittingly, is just as sleek as its anatomy. Yi-Ki, pronounced I-Chi. Just 2 letters, yet it rewrote entire paragraphs of paleontology textbooks. And it wasn't alone. Later discoveries, like Ambopteryx, revealed other Scanceriopterigids with similar membrane-based wing designs. This confirmed that Yi-Ki wasn't a one-off. It was part of a mini-lineage of bat-winged dinosaurs, a side branch of evolution we never even knew existed. They didn't lead to birds. They didn't survive the long game. But they tried something bold. Let's put this into perspective. If you looked at Yi-Ki through modern eyes, you'd see an animal that almost shouldn't exist. It had feathers, but didn't fly like birds. It had membranes, but wasn't a bat. It was a dinosaur, but acted like a glider. And it lived in trees, likely jumping from branch to branch, navigating the vertical world. Its story is a reminder that evolution isn't always a straight line from point A to point B. Sometimes it loops. Sometimes it scribbles. Sometimes it paints outside the lines. And Yi-Ki was one of those bold strokes of creative chaos, a fleeting, experimental form that dared to be different. But there's something poetic here too. In a way, Yi-Ki represents all the things we never used to believe about dinosaurs. We used to think they were slow, cold-blooded, and dull. Now we know they were fast, warm-blooded, and wildly diverse. We used to believe dinosaurs came in just a few familiar flavors. Now we see that they were stranger, fuzzier, and more experimental than we could have imagined. Yi-Ki didn't become the ancestor of anything modern. It's not in our birds today. It's not in bats. It's a dead end, evolutionarily speaking. But that doesn't make it a failure. It makes it a flash of brilliance. A moment in time when evolution went full C-Phi. And the fossil record. For once, let us see it. So next time you picture a dinosaur, imagine this. A small creature in the shadowy canopy. Feathers down its body, a strange membrane stretched across its arms like a glider suit. Its eyes flash amber in the fading Jurassic light. And when it jumps, it sails silently between the trees, like something caught between bird and bat. A living riddle, written in bone and wing. Chapter 16. Bapiosaurus, the weirdest claws you've never heard of. There are dinosaurs that look familiar, even if you've never heard of them. Sleek bodies, sharp teeth, feathered limbs, bird-like heads, and then there's Beipiosaurus. At first glance, it looks like someone took the head of a horse, the hands of an oversized sloth, and the body of a turkey, and mashed them together in some kind of prehistoric experiment. But this oddball from early Cretaceous China is more than just a Frankenstein fossil. It's one of the most revealing windows into an ancient world where feathers were not exclusive to flyers, and where evolution was pulling animals in strange, fascinating directions. Let's start with its hands. Because those hands, they're impossible to ignore. Bapiosaurus had massive claws, long, curved, and hooked like the blades of a scythe. These claws weren't just sharp. They were oversized for its body, each one nearly the length of its forearm. But here's the kicker. Bapiosaurus wasn't a predator. This wasn't a meat-ripping, prey-snagging machine. Despite its terrifying claws, Bapiosaurus was likely an herbivore, or at most, an omnivore. And that changes everything, because claws like that, on a peaceful plant eater, that's not common. It raises the question, what were they for? Let's rewind a bit. Bapiosaurus inexpectus was discovered in 1996 in Liaoning, China, the same fossil-rich region that gave us Sinosauropteryx, Microraptor, and Yuki. It lived about 125 million years ago, during the early Cretaceous. And while its bones were strange, the real treasure was its soft tissue impressions, because Bapiosaurus was covered in proto-feathers, hair-like filaments that were unlike the typical downy coat seen on other feathered dinosaurs. These filaments were broad and flat, not quite the sleek aerodynamic feathers used for flight. Instead, they were thick ribbon-like structures, possibly layered or tufted, a completely different feather type altogether, and that made it the first known dinosaur with this type of feather. It wasn't trying to fly. It wasn't trying to stay warm in a snowy climate. So what was the point? Let's start with the body. Bapiosaurus was a member of the Therizinosaur family, a group of theropods that, bizarrely, evolved away from predation. That's right, they started out as meat-eaters but over time switched to a plant-based diet. Their bodies morphed to reflect that. Heads became shorter and more beaked. Teeth grew smaller or disappeared entirely. Claws grew larger. Necks grew longer. It's a bit like watching a raptor evolve into a sloth, but keeping its feathers. So while Bapiosaurus is technically a theropod, the same broad group that gave us T-Rex and Velociraptor, it behaves more like a weird, long-clawed vegetarian. It stood about 7 feet long, 2.2 meters, walked on 2 legs, and had a long neck for browsing vegetation. Its hands ended in 3 clawed fingers, and its tail was short and stiff. And yes, its whole body was covered in filamentous feathers, but not fluffy ones. These were primitive feathers, thick, ribbon-like, possibly colored or patterned. Used not for flight, but for display, insulation, or maybe species recognition. Now, let's return to those claws. They weren't built for slicing meat. They were too unwieldy, too slow. Instead, paleontologists believe Bapiosaurus may have used its claws for hooking and pulling down branches like a prehistoric gardener. Think of a panda's wrist bone or a ground sloth's claws, same principle, different anatomy. Others suggest they were used in defense as a warning to predators. A swipe from those claws wouldn't have been fatal, but it would have been memorable. There's even a theory that the claws were used for digging, maybe to unearth roots or strip bark from trees. But perhaps the most compelling idea is this. Those claws were for show. Because in the natural world, form often follows function, but not always. Sometimes, evolution doubles down on something weird just because it gets attention, like a peacock's feathers, or a moose's antlers, or a bird of paradise doing backflips in the jungle. Maybe Bapiosaurus, despite its clumsy elegance, was using those claws to communicate, to impress mates, to intimidate rivals, to signal identity in a world full of feathery confusion. It's not about what the claws could do. It's about what they could say. There's something beautifully awkward about Bapiosaurus. It's in that in-between space, part predator, part herbivore, part raptor, part plucker of leaves, part bird, part sloth. And that liminal identity is what makes it so valuable to science. Because it shows us that evolution isn't always linear. It zigzags, it backtracks, it experiments. And sometimes it creates creatures that don't quite fit the mold and don't need to. Bapiosaurus wasn't evolving toward birds. It wasn't a missing link. It was its own branch, its own experiment, proof that even within the dinosaur lineage, multiple groups were independently developing feathers. Not just for flight, but for display, warmth, expression, and maybe even communication. Let's take a moment to imagine it, not as bones in a slab, but as a living animal. A quiet forest in Cretaceous China. A Bapiosaurus emerges from the underbrush, its feathers catching dappled sunlight. It moves slowly, deliberately, its long claws arcing downward as it pulls a leafy branch toward its beak. Around its neck and shoulders, thick ribbon-like feathers sway gently in the breeze. Another Bapiosaurus watches from nearby, a subtle head tilt, a display posture. The feathers rise slightly, just enough to show contrast, maybe color, a low hiss, a shuffle of claws in the dirt, and then calm again. This isn't the world of roaring predators. This is something more subtle, more social, more strange. This is a dinosaur that defies expectations. So what does Bapiosaurus teach us? That feathers were everywhere, not just on flyers. That even fearsome-looking dinosaurs could be peaceful. Vegetarians, that claws can be terrifying and beautiful all at once. That the more we discover, the more dinosaurs begin to resemble something startlingly modern. Not monsters from our nightmares, but creatures that felt emotions, interacted, signaled, displayed, and adapted in ways we're only just beginning to understand. And Bapiosaurus? It's a reminder that nature doesn't always color within the lines. Sometimes, it draws with feathers and claws, and creates something unforgettable. Chapter 17. Falcarius, the killer that turned vegetarian. Picture a dinosaur with long, grasping hands, hooked claws, sharp teeth. A body made for chasing prey. Now imagine it. Nibbling ferns. That's Falcarius. Its name means sickle cutter, and for good reason. Its claws are long and lethal, curved like scythes. It looks like a predator. It moves like one. But deep down, something in its biology had started to change. This was a creature standing at the crossroads of evolution, literally caught in the act of switching diets. Falcarius utahensis was first discovered in Utah in the early 2000s, in a site that turned out to be a paleontological gold mine. Not just one fossil, dozens, maybe hundreds, adults, juveniles, whole populations. It lived roughly 126 million years ago, during the early Cretaceous, a time when the world was greening, flowering plants were starting to spread, and certain dinosaurs were beginning to take advantage of this new buffet. But Falcarius came from the lineage of theropods, the group that includes Velociraptor, Allosaurus, and T-Rex. These were the original meat-eaters. Sharp teeth, hunting jaws, clawed feet. You know the type. And Falcarius looked like one of them, at least partially. It had a slender body, long tail, and a relatively small head. But when scientists looked closer, the details told a more complicated story. Let's start with the teeth. Predators usually have sharp, serrated teeth, perfect for slicing meat. Falcarius? Its teeth were leaf-shaped, not flat like a cow's, but definitely blunt for a theropod. They suggest it wasn't tearing into flesh anymore. It was likely eating plants, maybe soft leaves, fruits, and shoots. Its neck was longer than you'd expect from a carnivore, helpful for browsing. Its gut was expanding, making room for digesting tougher, fibrous food. And those claws? Still massive, still sharp. But maybe no longer for killing prey. Maybe they were for pulling down branches, stripping bark, or defending against predators now that it wasn't one anymore. This was a dinosaur that looked like a carnivore, but functioned more like a herbivore in training. You could almost see it happening, evolution in mid-stride. A killer, rethinking its options. Here's the wild part. Falcarius is now considered one of the earliest known members of a group called Dinosaurs, the same bizarre family that includes Bapiosaurus, which we just met in the last chapter. And Dinosaurs are among the strangest dinosaurs ever to exist. They're the ones with massive claws, pot bellies, long necks, and feathers. At first, no one knew what to make of them. Were they predators? Scavengers? Something else? It turns out, they were herbivorous theropods, a contradiction in itself. And Falcarius? It's the link between classic theropods and this new vegetarian order. It still had the predatory body plan, but it was starting to evolve all the traits needed to live a plant-based lifestyle. It's like catching a photo of evolution mid-mutation. Before it made up its mind. Let's talk environment. Falcarius lived in what is now central Utah, a lush floodplain filled with conifers, ferns, and cycads. A place with seasonal rains, flowing rivers, and plenty of vegetation. And it didn't live alone. The fossil site, known as the Crystal Geyser Quarry, contains the remains of hundreds of Falcarius individuals, adults, adolescents, even hatchlings. That suggests they were social. Maybe they traveled in herds or family groups. Maybe they nested together or died during a drought or volcanic event. Whatever the reason, the mass death site gave paleontologists a rare gift, a population snapshot of a species in transition. And what we learned changed how we understand dietary evolution in dinosaurs. Because before Falcarius, most evidence for herbivorous theropods came from later species like Therizinosaurus, huge, fully vegetarian giants with enormous claws and shaggy feathers. But Falcarius showed that the path to becoming a plant eater didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, slow, messy, and it started earlier than we thought. Let's imagine Falcarius in life. It walks on two legs, its long tail held straight behind for balance. Its arms, absurdly long, swing beneath feather-covered shoulders. Its claws curve like crescent moons. Its head is narrow, eyes sharp, beak beginning to form. It moves through undergrowth, browsing low-hanging leaves, occasionally rising to tug down a branch. It's alert, cautious, perhaps traveling in a small group. It's not a hunter anymore, but it remembers what that felt like. And it's still dangerous enough to not be trifled with. One of the biggest questions surrounding Falcarius is, why switch? Why would a lineage of predators give up meat, a high-protein, energy-rich diet, to become plant eaters? The answer lies in ecology. Plants were becoming more abundant. Flowering plants were on the rise. In some areas, meat may have been scarce or highly contested. Adapting to eat plants would have opened a new niche with fewer competitors. Once that transition began, natural selection would start reinforcing it. Longer necks to reach vegetation, flatter teeth for grinding, larger guts for fermentation, behavioral changes to avoid confrontation with apex predators, and the claws? They stayed, repurposed, adapted, transformed. Nature doesn't always throw away what's old. Sometimes it retools it. Falcarius is fascinating not just because of what it was, but because of what it represents. It's a snapshot of evolution. In motion, a predator learning to become peaceful. A glimpse into how one of the most bizarre dinosaur families came to be. It reminds us that dinosaurs weren't fixed stereotypes. Not every theropod was a killer. Not every herbivore was defenseless. They were adaptive, diverse, and always experimenting. And in Falcarius, we find the story of a creature that stood between two worlds, one foot in the past, the other in the future. So next time you think about evolution, don't picture a straight line. Picture a dinosaur like Falcarius, sharp claws, dull teeth, uncertain instincts, a killer turning leaf eater. A turning point in prehistoric history. And perhaps the most remarkable thing, it didn't just change what it ate. It changed what it was. Chapter 18. Compsognathus, the bunny-toothed dinosaur in the wide, weird family tree of dinosaurs. Some branches make sense. Predators evolve sharper claws. Plant eaters grow longer necks. Flyers develop wings. But then you find a creature like Compsognathus, and suddenly, the rules start to bend, because this dinosaur had buck teeth. Yes, you heard that right. Huge, flat, ever so slightly goofy front teeth, almost like a rabbit's. It's like if a velociraptor mated with bugs. Bunny and their kid decided vegetables were better than meat. Sounds absurd, but Compsognathus real. And it's one of the clearest signs that evolution has a sense of humor, and that not every theropod wanted to be a predator. Compsognathus Gautheri was discovered in 2002 in the fossil-rich Yixian Formation of northeastern China, a region already famous for yielding beautifully preserved feathered dinosaurs. But even by those high standards, Incisivosaurus stood out. The skull was small and lightly built. The body, slender and bird-like. But the teeth, oh those teeth, were what made headlines. Two oversized incisors dominated the upper jaw. Flat, worn, forward-facing. These weren't meant for slicing meat or grabbing prey. They were built for gnawing, perhaps on soft plant stems, roots, or fruit. In fact, if you removed the claws and tail, and just showed the skull to a modern mammal expert, they might easily mistake it for a rodent. But here's the twist. This buck-toothed herbivore wasn't some mammal. It was a theropod, the same broad group that includes T-Rex, Allosaurus, and Velociraptor, which makes Incisivosaurus another example of a carnivore turned vegetarian. But it did it with style. Let's talk about what we know. Incisivosaurus lived roughly 125 million years ago during the early Cretaceous. It measured about 1 meter long, just over 3 feet. Small, lightly built, and likely very agile. Its skull, especially the jaws, is what provides most of the clues about its diet. Paleontologists found that the front teeth were heavily worn, just like the incisors of modern animals that feed on tough vegetation. These teeth weren't used for biting flesh, they were used for snipping, scraping, and possibly even digging into bark. Behind the buck teeth were smaller cheek teeth, suggesting Incisivosaurus had some capacity for chewing, a rare trait among dinosaurs. Its beak-like snout may have been covered in keratin, the same material as bird beaks, which would help strip leaves or fruit. So here we have a dinosaur with rodent-like incisors, a partial beak, possibly feathers, and a diet of plants, and yet it's descended from a long line of meat-eaters. That's evolutionary whiplash. Now, where does Incisivosaurus fit in the grand tree? It's part of a group called Oviraptorosaurs, a weird, mostly toothless group of theropods with short skulls, crests, and bird-like bodies. Most Oviraptorosaurs look like modern ostriches crossed with cassowaries, sleek, toothless, and very birdy. But Incisivosaurus was one of the earliest members of that family, which makes it a missing link of sorts. It still had teeth. It still had a more elongated snout. But the shift was already beginning, away from predation, towards something new. This makes Incisivosaurus a valuable evolutionary snapshot. It shows the early steps of beak development, the transition to herbivory, and perhaps even the origin of more advanced Oviraptorosaurs. Its evolution mid-sentence. Let's not forget, it likely had feathers. Though no direct feather impressions have been found with Incisivosaurus. Its close relatives all had feathers. That includes Caudipteryx, Protarchaeoptery, and Oviraptor, all fully feathered. Oviraptorosaurus. So we can safely assume Incisivosaurus had a feathered coat, likely filamentous. Probably used for display, thermoregulation, or both. Imagine that. A fluffy little dinosaur, about the size of a house cat, nibbling on low plants with those ridiculous front teeth. That kind of endearing, right? But don't let the cuteness fool you. Just because Incisivosaurus was small and plant-eating doesn't mean it was weak. Its long hind legs suggest it was fast, a quick runner through the Cretaceous underbrush. Its large eyes and delicate skull imply sharp senses. And those incisor teeth, while comical, were specialized tools. It may not have hunted, but it thrived in a rapidly changing ecosystem, one where flowering plants were starting to appear. And where small, nimble dinosaurs had to adapt quickly to stay competitive. And it did. Incisivosaurus took a gamble: less meat, more mobility, better teeth for processing fiber. And in doing so, it helped pave the way for later, more specialized herbivores in the Oviraptorosaur family. What makes Incisivosaurus so interesting isn't just its look, it's what it represents. A total departure from the classic dinosaur stereotype. A little theropod that went in a different direction, not up toward flight, not down toward brute force, but sideways, into an ecological role nobody expected. And it reminds us that dinosaurs weren't all towering beasts or elegant flyers. Some were tiny, quiet, peculiar, even kind of funny looking, but they were all real, and they all had a role to play. So next time you think of dinosaurs, don't just think of T-Rex and Triceratops. Picture this: a small feathered creature, crouched in a patch of early ferns. Its body sways gently as it chews through a soft stalk. Sunlight flickers through the leaves. It perks up, alert to movement, then back to chewing. A dinosaur. With bunny teeth, still a theropod. Still descended from killers, but now a quiet little herbivore. Evolution's humor. In fossil form. Chapter 19, Epidexepteryx, the peacock of the Jurassic. What if I told you that some dinosaurs evolved feathers not to fly, but to show off? Before the first birds ever took to the skies, before wings meant flight, there were dinosaurs like Epidexepteryx, small, strange, and dazzling. It didn't soar. It didn't chase, but it strutted with purpose through the forest, trailing behind it a set of extravagant tail feathers, long, ribbon-like, and entirely impractical. And that's exactly what made it revolutionary, because Epidexepteryx wasn't just another small feathered dinosaur. It was a walking signal flare, a prehistoric billboard that screamed, "Look at me." The name Epidexepteryx means display feather, and that alone tells you everything you need to know. Discovered in 2008 in Inner Mongolia, its nearly complete fossil was a shock to the paleontological world. Not because of its size, it was no larger than a modern pigeon. Not because it had feathers. By then, feathered dinosaurs were well-known. No. What stunned scientists were the 4 long tail feathers that jutted stiffly out behind it, like ornate satin streamers. They weren't for flying. They weren't for warmth. They were, unmistakably, for show. Unlike flight feathers, which are asymmetrical and barbed for aerodynamics, these tail feathers were ribbons, symmetrical, smooth, and flat. Think party decorations. Think fashion runway. Think peacock. They were beautiful. And in evolutionary terms, they were completely unnecessary, unless you consider the power of attraction. Now imagine this. The Jurassic period. 160 million years ago. The ground is soft with ferns. The air is humid and thick with the smell of damp earth. A young Epidexepteryx hops onto a mossy log. It twitches its head, alert to movement. Its body is cloaked in soft, downy feathers. But from its rear, 4 elegant tail ribbons wave like banners in the light. Another creature watches from the branches. Is it competition, a rival, or maybe a potential mate? Because those tail feathers weren't just decoration. They were communication. A message sent through time, written in anatomy. I am healthy. I am confident. I am different. And maybe I'm the one you're looking for. Let's dive deeper into this strange little dinosaur. Epidexepteryx belonged to an obscure, almost mythical group of dinosaurs called the Scanceriopterigids. The name means climbing wing, and they're among the weirdest of all known theropods. Tiny, feathered, tree-dwelling. Many had elongated fingers, bizarrely long third digits. Some, like Yiki and Embopteryx, even evolved bat-like wings. Made of skin membranes like nothing else we've ever seen in the dinosaur world. But Epidexepteryx didn't have those wings. It had something better, a story. Unlike its gliding cousins, Epidexepteryx had no aerodynamic adaptations. No membranes, no wing feathers. Just a small, lightweight body, long arms, and ribbons of display. It was evolution choosing style over substance. A gamble, yes, but one that clearly worked. at least for a while. Here's the scientific kicker. Epidexipteryx is one of the oldest dinosaurs we know of that had feathers clearly not used for flight, and that flips the traditional narrative on its head. For decades, feathers were thought to be a flight-first adaptation, a clever solution that helped dinosaurs launch into the air, eventually giving rise to birds. But Epidexipteryx proves something far more fascinating. Feathers likely evolved first for display, not flight. They were tools for communication, courtship, and intimidation. Not survival in the traditional sense, but in the social sense. And when you think about it, isn't that still true? Even today, birds don't just use feathers to fly. They use them to dance, attract mates, scare off rivals, and blend into the world. Color, pattern, shape, flashed out feathers are the most expressive feature in the animal kingdom. And it started here, with Epidexipteryx flaunting tail streamers. In a world still ruled by giants, let's look at its skeleton. The head is short and blunt. The teeth are strange, forward-facing, and protruding, almost like rodent incisors. Probably used for snagging insects or soft fruit. The fingers are long, particularly the third one, almost absurdly extended. Possibly adapted for climbing or grabbing. The arms are proportionally large for its body size. It had hollow bones, like birds, keeping it light. The tail vertebrae were stiff and supported those unique ribbons. No other known dinosaur has tail feathers quite like these. Not even its cousins. And though we don't have skin impressions from Epidexipteryx, its closest relatives had fine, downy feathers covering the body. Safe to say, this little creature was likely fluffy. So now picture it again, a small, feather-coated creature perches in the lower canopy. Its tail sways slowly as it turns its head, surveying the forest. A flicker of color here, a flash of movement there. Its entire purpose? To be seen. So what was Epidexipteryx actually doing all day? Most likely, it lived a fairly quiet life. Browsing, climbing, leaping short distances, and searching for bugs. But when the time came to impress, it didn't fight or roar or flash teeth. It displayed. It turned itself into a spectacle. Because sometimes, being noticed was more powerful than being feared. And that may be why this species thrived. However briefly, in its corner of Jurassic history. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about speed. It was about expression. And that's a surprisingly modern concept. We humans like to think we invented art, the idea of beauty, the power of self-expression, but Epidexipteryx was doing it millions of years before we arrived. It tells us something fundamental about life itself, that sometimes it's not just about eating and surviving. It's about standing out. In a crowded forest filled with noise and motion and danger, this tiny dinosaur said, "I won't fight you. I won't run. But you're going to remember me." That's evolutionary poetry. And in a way, Epidexipteryx helps explain why birds look the way they do today. The flash of a cardinal's wings, the metallic shimmer of a hummingbird, the blazing tail of a peacock, those aren't just adaptations. For movement, they're messages, inherited from creatures like Epidexipteryx, who figured out that what you show can matter as much as what you do. It's proof that evolution has more than one voice. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it roars, and sometimes it struts. So next time you see a bird preening, or dancing, or flashing its feathers in the sun, remember that it's participating in a ritual that began deep in time, when a little dinosaur, smaller than a crow, grew 4 long ribbons from its tail and made the forest its stage. It didn't fly. It didn't fight. It performed. And somehow, that was enough. Chapter 20. Colindodromus, the dinosaur that changed everything about feathers in the summer of 2014. The scientific world experienced a quiet earthquake. Not from a towering predator. Not from some new flying creature. But from a small, unassuming herbivore named Colindodromus, A dinosaur no bigger than a turkey, discovered in the cold heart of Siberia. It wasn't fierce. It wasn't fast. But it did one thing no one expected. It grew feathers, and not the kind you might expect from a bird-like predator. These were proto-feathers, hair-like filaments, branching structures, and scaly skin all on the same animal, which shattered a century of assumptions in a single fossil. Because Compsognathus wasn't a theropod, it was an ornithischian, a member of the same broad group as Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and Ankylosaurus, and that meant only one thing. Feathers weren't just a theropod thing. They were a dinosaur thing. Let's rewind. Before Compsognathus, feathers had been found exclusively in a select group of theropods, the bipedal, mostly carnivorous dinosaurs that included Velociraptor, Deinonychus, and the ancestors of modern birds. It made sense. Birds evolved from theropods. Theropods had feathers. End of story. But then came this little Siberian oddball, and it threw a wrench in everything. Its body was coated in 3 distinct types of feather-like structures. Fine, hair-like filaments covering the trunk and neck, tufts of bristle-like filaments emerging from the upper arms and thighs. Strange, flat ribbon-like structures with multiple filaments, branching from a central base, unlike anything seen before in any dinosaur. Add to that scaly skin on the feet and tail, and you get a creature that looked like a bizarre mashup of bird, lizard, and fuzzball. This mix of scales and feathers isn't just cool. It's revolutionary. It suggests that feathers may have evolved much earlier in dinosaur evolution than we thought, perhaps even in their common ancestor. That means even the giants, the long-necked sauropods and armored tank-like ankylosaurs, could have had some kind of feather-like covering, at least in their early stages or juveniles. Let that sink in. A fluffy stegosaurus. A bristly brachiosaurus. Not fully feathered, perhaps, but not completely scaly either. It changes everything. But who was Compsognathus? It lived about 160 million years ago, during the Middle to Late Jurassic, in what is now eastern Siberia. It was small, around 1.5 meters long, about 5 feet, but most of that was tail. It walked on 2 legs, had short arms, and likely lived a quiet life grazing on ferns and low vegetation. Its skull was modest, with a beak-like front perfect for cropping plants. In many ways, it was a standard garden variety ornithischian, and that's what made the discovery so shocking. It wasn't some weird exception. It was ordinary, and yet it had feathers, which means feather-like body coverings weren't rare. They were normal. Even in lineages where no one had ever thought to look. The implications? Huge. If feathers were present in both theropods and ornithischians, they likely date back to the earliest common ancestor of all dinosaurs, over 230 million years ago. That ancestor may not have had full feathers, but it almost certainly had proto-feathers, early filamentous structures used for insulation, display, or sensory functions. So forget everything you were taught in childhood. Dinosaurs weren't just scaly, gray, lumbering beasts. Many were fuzzy, colorful, and visually complex. Feathers weren't a rare trait. They were a baseline feature. The default, not the exception. Let's visualize Compsognathus, a cool Siberian dawn. Mist rises between pine-like trees and ginkgos. In the clearing, a small herd of Compsognathus graze silently. Their bodies are cloaked in soft fuzz. Tufts bristle at their thighs. Their tails, striped in scales and fluff, twitch as they communicate with subtle movements. This isn't a prehistoric monster movie. It's a quiet scene. More mammal than reptile. And yet, undeniably dinosaur. So what were those feather-like structures for? Well, they likely weren't for flight. Compsognathus was firmly grounded. Instead, scientists believe they served a few purposes. Insulation. Siberia wasn't icy in the Jurassic, but it was likely cooler than tropical regions. Fuzz helps maintain warmth. Display. The more elaborate tufts and ribbons may have played a role in mating or social signals. Sensory function, much like whiskers or cat hair. These filaments might have helped the animal sense its environment. But the most exciting possibility? They were simply there. Part of the genetic legacy of dinosaurs, waiting to evolve into more complex feathers when the opportunity arose. And Compsognathus wasn't alone since its discovery. Hints of feather-like filaments have been found in other ornithischians, including Psittacosaurus and even the armored Tuanulong. These aren't isolated cases. They're data points in a bigger picture, one where feathers weren't a clever theropod invention, but a dinosaur-wide innovation. And here's the coolest twist. Even pterosaurs, the flying reptiles that weren't technically dinosaurs, had pycnofibers, hair-like structures remarkably similar to protofeathers. So maybe proto-feathers go back even before dinosaurs. Maybe they originated in the earliest archosaurs, the grand ancestors of both dinosaurs and pterosaurs, which means that feathers are not just the legacy of birds. They are one of nature's most enduring experiments. Now, let's get personal. What does Compsognathus tell us? That the story of evolution is not always what we expect, that small things can make big waves, and that sometimes it's not the giants who change the world, but the overlooked, fuzzy little herbivores from frozen places. Compsognathus reminds us that discovery isn't about confirming what we already know. It's about being surprised. It's about finding feathers in all the wrong places and realizing they were never wrong at all. They were just waiting for us to notice. So next time you imagine the dinosaur world, don't picture a cold-blooded wasteland of scales and teeth. Picture diversity, color, texture. Fluffy arms, bristled tails, tufted thighs. Imagine a world alive not just with roars, but with rustling feathers. Not just with predators and prey, but with beauty, warmth, and evolutionary invention. A world where even a quiet little plant eater could change everything. That's the world Compsognathus lived in, and thanks to it, we now see dinosaurs not as monsters, but as animals.